Hey everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Insiders Are The New Malware, Protecting Your Data from Insider Threats. My name's Rob Sobers and I'm a marketing director at Varonis, but really I'm an engineer disguised as a marketer. I've spent most of my career as a software developer, writing code, and of course, breaking into systems, which is why information security is one of my favorite topics. You can find me tweeting about it at rsobers and writing about it at blog.varonis.com. If you'd like to grab a copy of the slides, you can get them at the URL you see on your screen. I'll be sure to put this slide back up at the end of the presentation too. All right, before we dive in, I want to share the story about how Varonis was started, because I think it's interesting and also very relevant to the topic today. Our co-founders, Yaki Feidelson and Ohad Korkis, were working for NetApp on a project in Angola, which is on the western coast of Africa. One of the missions was to deploy deep-sea divers and submarines to take high-res photos of the ocean floor. They were storing these photos, which were worth millions of dollars, on their file servers, and one day they were gone. Everyone turned to Yaki and Ohad and said, "You guys are the storage experts, tell us what happened. Were they stolen? Were they accidentally deleted? Who had access to them?" Unfortunately, there was no audit trail, no easy way to determine what happened. Luckily, they were able to recover the files, but this near disaster prompted Yaki and Ohad to found Varonis to help organizations manage and protect their valuable information. Fast forward to today, and data protection has never been more important. This bubble graph from informationisbeautiful.net plots data breaches in excess of 30,000 records. You can see that nobody's immune. Just look at the diversity of organizations represented. You've got retailers, banks, healthcare, some site called Ashley Madison, not entirely sure what that is. And as we scroll down, you'll notice how many serious large-scale incidents there have been. And as we travel back to about a decade ago, you might also notice that there are far fewer incidents and the density of the bubbles is significantly less than what we saw in 2015. So, what do all the big breaches have in common? Well, usually the threat was already inside, either as a trusted insider like Edward Snowden, or an outsider who got inside undetected. Usually unstructured data is what's stolen: documents, emails, images, spreadsheets, video in the case of Sony. And lastly, traditional security didn't stop it. Firewalls, antivirus, DLP, these were all present for many of these attacks, but they didn't help. 2015 was a banner year for insider threats. Here are a few stats I found interesting from SANS and crowd research partners. It's estimated that every organization suffers about 3.8 insider breaches on average per year, and most go undetected. And as we've seen with Sony and Target, executives are now losing their jobs, and the reputational damage can far outstrip the financial penalties, which are also nothing to sneeze at, especially if you look at the Target situation. So that's a brief overview of why we really need to focus on insider threats. Now let's take a look at what we're going to cover throughout the rest of this session. We're going to start out by demonstrating just how easy it is to bypass authentication or steal credentials and get inside. Then we'll take a look at how easy it is for insiders to steal information. And lastly, we'll cover a 3-step playbook called Inside Out Security, which helps you protect your information even when the threat you face is inside your walls. Today, anybody can be a hacker. It's really just not that hard to breach the perimeter anymore. Let's take a look at some examples. Who's heard of this little boy who hacked his dad's Xbox? His name's Christopher von Hassel, and he was able to bypass the parental controls on his dad's Xbox by typing a bunch of spaces into the password field. He inadvertently exposed a security flaw in Microsoft's authentication, and they awarded him a bug bounty. Not only do we have to worry about security flaws in applications like the one in the Xbox, but one of the main causes of breach is employee error. Leaving a USB stick at Starbucks, sending a sensitive email to the wrong person, these are all real dangers. And of course, everybody's favorite risk, phishing. Phishing has become scarily effective. In Verizon's data breach report last year, they found that phishing emails had an average open rate of 23%. And 11% of recipients clicked on attachments. But what's particularly scary about that 11% stat is that if attackers get your employees to click, there are immediate and grave consequences. In most cases, it means that malware or ransomware has been staged, and an attacker has control of at least one machine on your network, and then they'll start pivoting and escalating. And then, of course, we have privilege abuse. This is disgruntled Dan. We all know him. He's been working with the company for years. He's got lots of access and is heading to a competitor in 2 weeks. Dan decides to grab every single confidential file and email he's ever worked on and bring them with him to the competitor. How do you stop him? He's supposed to have access. So if you're not carefully monitoring his behavior and comparing it to a baseline of what's normal, it may be impossible to stop. Has anybody seen one of these little devices? This is a Wi-Fi pineapple. It costs about $100, it's legal, and it lets anyone perform man-in-the-middle attacks. You plug this bad boy into your Ethernet port, give it a SID like a free airport Wi-Fi, and go to town. Everyone around you starts connecting to your pineapple thinking it's a legit Wi-Fi network, and you can use Wireshark or something similar to inspect all the unencrypted traffic that's flowing through. And you can find passwords, authentication cookies, all sorts of great stuff with the pineapple. And one of the reasons why it works so well is because most people's wireless devices have a convenience feature that auto connects to networks they remember. So when your device turns on, it sends out a signal saying, hey, is such and such network around? And the pineapple is designed to intercept those requests and say yes to all of them. And now we have ransomware as a service. Ransom32 is the world's first JavaScript-based malware, which means it can run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And what's more, you don't have to operate it. An amateur criminal can go to Ransom32, enter their Bitcoin address, download some custom malware, and then target somebody with a phishing attack. And once the payload is successfully delivered, Ransom32 handles everything else. They extract the ransom, they collect the payment, and they give you a 75% cut, keeping 25% for themselves. They give you a pretty cool dashboard that lets you control the behavior of your malware, figure out how much money you want to extract, and it even shows you the success metrics for your campaign. So now that we've established that getting inside is easier than ever before, let's talk about stealing stuff. Raise your hand if you've ever heard the term offensive PowerShell. Well, it's exactly what you think. Hackers using PowerShell to do really bad things. There's been a sharp increase in the use of PowerShell as a malware vector over the past year or two, mainly because PowerShell has everything an attacker could want. It's installed by default on Windows 7 and above, and it has access to built-in libraries that make it possible to assemble fully functional malware on the fly and in memory. And that's exactly what a red team at Varonis Group did when they created PowerShell Empire. Empire is a remote access Trojan that transforms PowerShell into a suite of dangerous exploit tools. Here's how it works in a nutshell. You stage Empire by getting your target to execute one line of PowerShell that can be embedded in an Office macro. The stager injects shellcode into an existing process like calc.exe or notepad.exe, and then you own the machine. Now you have a hard-to-detect communication channel back to your command and control server. Empire has commands that help you escalate privileges by hunting down sysadmins, and an implementation of Mimikatz to dump their credentials or grab password hashes. As you can see, this is some really powerful stuff, and while it's being used by red teams all over the place, it's also being used by attackers. But of course, not every breach has to be that sophisticated. Take, for instance, this large Midwestern university that a couple years ago leaked 146,000 student records. The cause of the breach? No, it wasn't a hacktivist group. It was copy and paste. An innocent user dragged and dropped some spreadsheets into a public file share, and bam, you have a breach. And then sometimes we just give information away. This girl on the left was so excited to get her new credit card that she posted it on Twitter. Of course, this type of carelessness isn't limited to college kids on Twitter. We were recently working with a large casino who had literally millions of credit card numbers in text files, in plain text, stored in a file share that was open to everyone in the company. And we didn't need Empire to figure that out, right? A simple PowerShell command built in, find string, would have exposed that data to anybody who cared to look for it. And this leads to sort of a more general point that I want to make. When it comes to assessing risk, we tend to have irrational biases. What do you fear more, being attacked by a mountain lion or slipping in the shower? As humans, we tend to greatly exaggerate risks that are sensational and beyond our control, like a mountain lion attack or nuclear radiation. Yet we underestimate the mundane but far more common risks that we can control, like slipping in the shower or falling from a ladder. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to die from a shower fall than a mountain lion because you encounter that risk every day. Likewise, you're more likely to suffer a breach from copy and paste than an APT because users are touching data all day, every day. We thought the fight against malware was an arms race. You have to block this strain or that strain, check this registry key, update your signature database. Every process, every file, every machine has to be evaluated as a potential risk. But now every employee has to be evaluated as well. So how do we stop insiders? In order to combat the insider threat, we need to shift our focus from the perimeter to the data itself. We need to secure the data from the inside out. We have a playbook at Varonis that we use with our customers to ensure that trusted insiders and attackers who get inside are discovered quickly and can inflict minimal damage. We call it inside-out security. The inside-out security approach protects data in 3 phases. Number 1, we detect threats by mapping your environment, analyzing data access, and baselining user behavior. Number 2, we prevent disaster by locking down sensitive information, reducing excessive access, and removing vulnerable accounts and other dangerous artifacts. And then number 3, we sustain a secure state by automating authorization requests, migrations, and data disposition as well. All right, let's take a look at the first step, which is detection. There are so many fundamental IT questions, like the ones I've listed here on this slide, that are really hard to answer without more intelligence than our native storage platforms give us. Think about how you'd answer your CEO if she asked you for a list of all folders that Bob could potentially access on a Windows network. It's nearly impossible because Windows and Active Directory doesn't give us that intelligence. The first task is to map your environment. Now, this involves gathering all the users and groups from Active Directory as well as any local server accounts and then correlating them with the permissions on each platform you want to monitor. Now, traditionally, there's been a big disconnect between users and groups and the permissions that they have. And by marrying those 2 data sets, you can start answering questions like, what does Bob have access to across all of our servers? Or, who has access to the legal folder and how are they getting it? This bidirectional map is fundamental to protecting your data from insiders. Next, it's important to scan for sensitive information and identify where it lives. You can combine this classification information with the permissions metadata in the previous step to produce a report that tells you where you have high concentrations of sensitive data that's also overexposed. Many DLP products will tell you where your sensitive information lives and classify it for you, but it doesn't necessarily give you a clear path to fixing it due to the lack of context about who can access it and who actually does access it. Which brings us to the next task, which is turning on auditing. Native auditing can be a hard sell because it can be performance intensive and verbose. At Varonis, we use custom filters to capture every event from every user on each platform that we monitor. And this ensures that performance is optimized and that we're not burdening the servers that are storing your data. We also normalize the audit information so it can be stored and analyzed for long periods of time without purging. This type of searchable audit trail is critical to security investigations and compliance reporting, but it's also essential for real-time alerting and user behavior analytics. Our customers have had a lot of success preventing insider breaches using some of the alerts you see here. We create a baseline of all user activity, allowing you to detect suspicious behavior, whether it's an insider accessing sensitive content, or an administrator abusing their privileges, or maybe a user got infected with something like CryptoLocker. Real-time alerting is critical in being able to stop these threats before they become a big problem. By combining behavioral analysis with knowledge of what's actually inside the files that insiders are touching, alerts become much more accurate than traditional methods that either rely on activity alone or knowledge about data sensitivity alone. You can send only these high-fidelity alerts to your SIEM for further analysis and correlation, rather than flooding it with every single unstructured data access event. The second phase is prevention. Most organizations have sensitive files and folders open to everyone in the company, stale data that hasn't been touched in years, and overly complex permission structures that haven't been well maintained. These are risks that compound the damage that an insider can do. If you haven't locked down your sensitive data, just about any employee can get their hands on it. Applying global access to the company's holiday party photos is probably okay, but in the vast majority of cases, we should avoid global access like the plague. I've seen global access applied to folders with millions of credit card numbers, healthcare data, and more. And the problem can be very hard to remediate because you can't just pull everyone's access without inciting a riot. When everyone under the sun has access, it's very difficult to know who really needs that access. And so the solution is to look at historical access activity in your audit trail and determine who's been accessing the data exclusively via those global access groups. Our Data Advantage product shows you which information is globally accessible and who's been actually accessing it. And from there, you can apply tighter permissions and run a simulation that will tell you exactly which people will be impacted if you were to make permissions changes. This capability is indispensable when doing global access remediation. Not only do you avoid a bunch of angry phone calls, but you also avoid making a big mistake and accidentally cutting off a revenue-generating application from writing to disk. The next task is to remove excessive permissions. Permissions creep plagues us all. It's hard to prevent and can be even harder to remediate. How often does the help desk receive a call from a user complaining that they have too much access? Never. People change jobs, departments, responsibilities. Temporary projects often require temporary access, but temporary access has a way of becoming permanent. And you have consultants who start and end contracts. How do you know for sure when somebody no longer needs access to data? You can probably analyze a person's activity, and if they stop accessing everything, then you can just disable their account. A better answer is hidden in this little red X. I included a picture of Elon Musk because it feels like something he should have invented. The X is Varonis telling us that Andrew Wyrick no longer needs access to the company's finance data. It determines this through bidirectional cluster analysis. So not only does Andrew not use the data anymore, but his fundamental data access behaviors no longer match a typical member of the finance group. And you can then manually accept these recommendations or have Varonis automatically execute these revocations on your behalf. All right, so what about all the cruft in your environment? It can be bothersome, but it's also a huge risk. I asked a hacker friend of mine, what's the number one thing that makes your job easy once you get inside? And she answered immediately with dirty networks. We see a lot of dirty networks during our free risk assessments, and usually this means a high percentage of uniquely permissioned folders, broken ACLs, deeply nested groups where no one understands what access is granted by putting somebody inside a group. All this complexity breeds risk, and so a key step in the process is to run reports that expose these dangerous artifacts so we can eliminate them or fix them. All right, now that you've successfully mapped your environment, turned on monitoring, locked down exposed data, and cleaned up dangerous objects, the trick is to sustain those efforts without doubling your IT staff. The first task in the sustain phase is to use the access activity to determine who the likely data owners are. Business users have much more context than IT when it comes to making decisions about access, so let's give them that responsibility. Assigning ownership in a way that relies on hard evidence of usage versus a qualitative survey that asks them, hey, do you own this folder or this file share, really increases your odds of success here. Once you have owners in place, you can route access control requests directly to them or establish approval workflows. With Varonis Data Privilege, we have a web form that a user can submit, and the request is routed directly to an owner or authorizer via email. And they can reply to that email saying, yep, this person should be approved, they deserve access, or they can deny it right there by replying to the email. On the back end, Data Privilege handles all the different permission changes and removals from AD, so you don't have to burden IT with handling that request as a middleman. Lastly, establishing a regular cadence for reviewing access is crucial to limiting damage from insiders. By automating entitlement reviews, data owners get an email once a month or once a quarter saying, hey, it's time to perform your review. They click a link and then they see a list of users with that handy red X from before, which shows them who Varonis recommends for removal. When they're done, they digitally sign the form and permission changes are again made on their behalf. And the whole process is audited. So not only are you regularly ensuring that only the right people have access, you can prove to your auditors that you have a working process in place. So that concludes our 3-step process of detecting insider threats through auditing and baselining user behavior and understanding our environment, preventing insider threats by locking down sensitive information and removing risky artifacts, and then sustaining a secure state by automating cleanup tasks, authorization workflows, and entitlement reviews. That's it. Be sure to sign up for a free threat assessment, and we'll perform all 3 steps of the Inside Out Security Playbook in your actual environment. There's no commitment, and you get a nice risk report at the end that'll help you take action.